Hey guys, tonight we dive into the brutal, unforgiving world of pyramid builders in ancient Egypt. From the backbreaking labor under the scorching desert sun to the crushing hierarchy that turned human beings into disposable tools, this story is haunting, relentless, a defining moment in human exploitation that built wonders at the cost of countless lives. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And let me know in the comments where you're tuning in from and what you think about the true cost of ancient monuments. Now, let's begin. The first pale light of dawn creeps across the eastern horizon as you slowly open your eyes in the workers' village near Giza. The air is thick with the acrid smell of cooking fires, unwashed bodies, and the ever-present dust that seems to coat everything in this place. You lie on a thin reed mat, your body aching from yesterday's labor, surrounded by dozens of other workers crammed into this small mud brick dwelling. The walls are stained with soot and sweat, and somewhere in the darkness you can hear the labored breathing of men whose lungs are slowly being destroyed by limestone dust. You are no longer the person you once were. Perhaps you were a farmer from the Nile Delta, maybe a craftsman from a small village upriver. But that life is gone now, swept away like sand in the desert wind. You have been conscripted, selected by the royal administrators who moved through Egypt like locusts, gathering human resources for the pharaohs' eternal monument. Your family received a small compensation, barely enough to survive the season, while you were marched here to join the thousands of others who would spend their remaining years building a tomb for a god king. The overseer's horn sounds in the distance, a harsh, braying note that cuts through the morning air like a blade. Around you, bodies begin to stir. Men groan as they push themselves upright, their joints protesting after another night on the hard ground. You notice how thin everyone has become, how their eyes have taken on that hollow, distant look of people who have accepted their fate. The younger workers still show traces of defiance, but the older ones move with the mechanical precision of men who have learned that resistance only brings more suffering. You push yourself to your feet, feeling the familiar, sharp pain in your lower back, where a stone block shifted and crushed your spine against another worker's shoulder 3 months ago. The injury never healed properly. How could it, when you were back to hauling limestone the next morning? You've learned to work through the pain, just as you've learned to ignore the constant gnawing hunger in your belly and the way your hands have become permanently stained with blood from rope burns and stone cuts. Outside, the morning ritual begins. Workers emerge from their cramped quarters like ants from a disturbed hill, forming ragged lines as the overseers begin their count. You've seen men disappear in the night, their bodies carried away to unmarked graves beyond the village, and you've noticed how quickly new workers arrive to fill the gaps. The system is efficient, brutally so. Human beings are resources to be consumed, just like the limestone blocks that form the pyramid's massive structure. The overseer approaches your line, his leather whip coiled at his side. He's an Egyptian, not foreign labor like you, and he carries himself with the casual cruelty of a man who has learned to see workers as less than human. His eyes scan the group, looking for signs of sickness or weakness. Anyone who can't work is a waste of food and water. You've learned to stand straight despite the pain, to keep your expression neutral, despite the despair that gnaws at your soul like a hungry animal. You, he points at the man beside you, a young farmer from Upper Egypt whose spirit hasn't been completely broken yet. Step forward. The young man's hands are shaking as he moves out of line. His crime was trying to send a message to his family last week, paying a traveling merchant to carry word that he was still alive. Such personal concerns are forbidden here. The overseer's whip cracks across the young man's back, and you hear the sharp intake of breath that follows. 1 strike, 2, 3. The message is clear to everyone watching. As the sun climbs higher, the temperature begins to rise. You know that within hours, the heat will become unbearable. The limestone blocks will burn your hands, and the desert sun will feel like a physical weight pressing down on your shoulders. But for now, in these early morning moments, there's almost a sense of peace. The air is still cool, the work hasn't begun, and you can almost pretend that this is just another day in a life that still belongs to you. But then you see it, rising from the desert floor like a mountain of human ambition and suffering. The pyramid, even unfinished, it dominates the landscape, its massive limestone blocks catching the morning light and throwing it back in harsh, geometric patterns. You've been working on this monument for 2 years now, and it's grown from a foundation of perfectly cut stones to a structure that seems to touch the sky itself. Every block represents days of labor, gallons of sweat, and often human blood. The overseer's horn sounds again, longer this time, and you know that the day's work is about to begin. Around you, workers begin to move toward the construction site, their feet raising small clouds of dust that catch the morning light. You fall into step with them, becoming part of the human river that flows toward the pyramid each dawn. Your body moves automatically now, muscle memory guiding you along past the village of the damned. But before we follow you into another day of backbreaking labor, let's step back into the place you call home now. If home is even the right word for what amounts to a carefully organized prison, the workers' village spreads across the desert floor like a collection of scabs on burned skin, a testament to human suffering disguised as accommodation. You return to this place each evening when the sun finally releases its grip on the desert and the temperature drops enough that men can move without collapsing from heat exhaustion. The village consists of long, narrow buildings made from mud brick and limestone chips, the discarded fragments from the pyramid construction. Nothing is wasted here except human lives. The walls are thick enough to provide some insulation from the desert heat, but thin enough that every sound carries through the complex like whispers in a tomb. Each building houses roughly 40 workers, packed into spaces that would be cramped for half that number. You sleep in rows, your sleeping mat barely an arm's length from your neighbors on either side. Privacy is a concept that died the day you arrived here. You've learned to sleep through the sound of men crying in their dreams, calling out names of wives and children they'll never see again. You've grown accustomed to the smell of unwashed bodies, infected wounds, and the sour odor of men whose digestive systems have been ruined by poor food and constant stress. The village follows a strict layout, designed not for comfort, but for control. The workers' quarters form the outer ring, while the overseers and administrators live in better constructed buildings near the center. The granaries and workshops occupy the middle ground, and at the heart of it all stands the residence of the chief architect, a man who sees the pyramid workers as nothing more than expendable tools in his grand design. Water is precious here, more valuable than gold in many ways. The village has 3 wells, all of them carefully guarded and rationed. Each worker receives a daily allowance that barely meets basic survival needs. You've learned to drink slowly, to savor each sip, because once your ration is gone, there will be no more until tomorrow. The water itself is often brackish, tainted with sand, and sometimes worse things. Dysentery spreads through the village like wildfire during certain seasons, turning the latrines into places of agony where men soil themselves while working because they can't afford to stop. The latrines themselves are another source of misery. Long trenches dug in the sand, covered with wooden planks that splinter and cut. The smell carries across the entire village when the wind is wrong and flies swarm in black clouds that seem to follow you everywhere. Disease breeds in these places, spreading from worker to worker with ruthless efficiency. You've seen strong men reduced to hollow shells by intestinal parasites. Watch them waste away while still being forced to work until they literally couldn't stand. Food arrives each morning in wooden carts pulled by donkeys. The basic ration is simple: coarse bread, onions, garlic, and occasionally a small piece of dried fish. The bread is often moldy, the onions rotted, the garlic sprouting green shoots. But you eat it anyway, because hunger is a constant companion. Here, gnawing at your belly like a living thing, the workers, who can still afford it, trade their few possessions for extra food, creating a small black market economy within the village walls. You've learned to recognize the hierarchy even in these miserable quarters. The skilled stone carvers and engineers sleep in slightly better sections, receive marginally more food, and suffer fewer beatings. The common laborers, men like yourself, exist at the bottom of this pyramid of human misery. Below even you are the foreign slaves, captured in wars or bought from distant lands. They don't even speak the local language, making their isolation complete and their suffering almost incomprehensible. At night, when the work is done and the overseers have retreated to their quarters, the village takes on a different character. Small groups gather around tiny fires, made from construction scraps, sharing stories in hushed voices. These conversations are dangerous. Too much talk of home, too many complaints about conditions, and you might find yourself singled out for special attention by the overseers. But the human need for connection is stronger than fear, at least for some. You've noticed how the village changes men over time. New arrivals still have flesh on their bones, still carry themselves with some dignity. Their eyes hold hope, anger, defiance. But month by month, you watch these qualities drain away like water seeping into sand. Their bodies become lean and hard, their faces gaunt, their eyes taking on that 1,000-yard stare of men who have seen too much suffering and accepted it as the natural order of things. The children in the village are perhaps the most heartbreaking sight. Some workers were conscripted, along with their families, and their children have grown up knowing no other life than this. You see them playing games with rocks and sticks, mimicking the work of hauling blocks up the pyramid. They laugh and run, but their laughter has a hollow quality, and their games always seem to involve death and suffering. They're being shaped by this place, molded into future workers who will know nothing but servitude. Women in the village face their own particular hell. Some are workers' wives, forced to cook and clean and care for the injured. Others are slaves, assigned to domestic duties. All of them live under the constant threat of sexual violence from overseers and administrators. You've seen women disappear into the administrative quarters and return days later, broken and silent. The village has no law except the will of those in power, and women are considered property just like the limestone blocks. Disease is a constant presence in the village. During certain seasons, fever sweeps through the quarters like a scythe, cutting down workers by the dozens. The bodies are removed quickly, carried away to burial pits beyond the village walls, where they're stacked like cordwood and covered with sand. No ceremonies, no mourning period, no acknowledgement that these were once human beings with hopes and dreams and families who loved them. The medical care available is primitive at best. A few elderly women know some healing herbs and can set broken bones. But serious injuries mean death. You've watched men die slowly from infections that could have been easily treated with proper medicine. You've seen workers crushed by falling stones who lingered for days before death finally claimed them, their screams echoing through the village until their voices gave out. And yet, somehow, life continues. Workers form relationships, even knowing they might lose each other at any moment. Couples share sleeping mats, creating tiny islands of intimacy in this ocean of suffering. Friendships develop based on shared hardship, creating bonds that are sometimes stronger than blood. Small acts of kindness, sharing a piece of bread, helping an injured worker to his feet, offering a shoulder to cry on, become acts of rebellion against the dehumanizing system. The village operates on its own brutal rhythm. Before dawn, the overseers make their rounds, kicking sleeping workers awake and counting heads. After work, the injured are tended to as best as possible with the limited resources available. Night brings a brief respite, but also the sounds of suffering that never quite stop. Men coughing up blood from lung damage, the quiet sobs of those who still have tears left to shed, the occasional argument that breaks out when stress and exhaustion overcome judgment. As you lie on your sleeping mat each night, listening to the symphony of human misery around you, you sometimes wonder how long you can survive in this place. You've seen men give up, simply stop eating and drinking until death takes them. You've watched others go mad, talking to people who aren't there or laughing at things that aren't funny. The village has a way of breaking people down, wearing away at their humanity, until only the basic animal instinct for survival remains. And tomorrow, like every other day, you'll wake to the overseer's horn and make your way back to the pyramid, carrying with you the weight of another night in this village of the damned, this place where human beings are reduced to their most basic function as beasts of burden in service to a dead king's eternal vanity. Before the sun, the darkness, before dawn is thick and oppressive. like a heavy blanket that refuses to be lifted. You feel yourself being pulled from the depths of exhausted sleep by the familiar sound that has haunted your dreams for months now. The harsh guttural blast of the ram's horn that signals the beginning of another day in hell. The sound echoes off the mud brick walls of the workers' quarters, bouncing back and forth in the narrow spaces between buildings until it seems to come from everywhere at once. Your body resists waking. Every muscle aches from yesterday's labor. Every joint protests as you try to move. Your hands are still wrapped in strips of linen, crude bandages to cover the rope burns, and stone cuts that never quite heal. The pain has become so constant that you barely notice it anymore, like the sound of your own breathing or the beat of your heart. It's simply part of existing in this place. Around you, other workers are stirring with the same reluctant movements. Men groan as they push themselves upright, their joints crackling like dry wood in a fire. Someone nearby is coughing, a wet, rattling sound that speaks of lungs slowly filling with stone dust and infection. Another worker is muttering prayers to gods who seem to have abandoned this place entirely, his voice barely audible above the general sounds of misery. The overseer's assistant moves through the quarters with a torch, its flickering light casting dancing shadows on the walls. He's a young man, Egyptian, who still has enough flesh on his bones to suggest he eats better than the workers. His job is to make sure everyone is awake and accounted for, to identify those too sick to work, and to maintain the count that the administrators require. He carries a short stick that he uses to prod workers who are slow to rise. You swing your legs over the side of your sleeping mat, feeling the familiar sharp pain in your lower back where that stone block crushed you against another worker months ago. The injury never healed properly. How could it, when rest is a luxury that doesn't exist here? You've learned to move carefully, to protect the damaged parts of your body while still meeting the demands placed on you. Survival has become a delicate balance between pushing yourself hard enough to avoid punishment and preserving what little strength you have left. The air in the quarters is thick with the smell of unwashed bodies, infected wounds, and human waste. 40 men living in a space meant for half that number creates its own particular atmosphere, one that clings to your clothes and hair and skin no matter how much you try to wash it away. The small windows near the ceiling provide little ventilation, and the desert air outside is often too hot or too cold to offer much relief anyway. Other workers begin the slow process of preparing for the day. There's no rushing here. Experienced pyramid builders have learned that wasted energy in the morning means collapse before the day is half over. You watch an older worker, a man who's been here longer than anyone can remember, as he carefully examines his hands and feet for new injuries. His fingers are permanently bent from gripping ropes, his palms covered in calluses so thick they look like pieces of leather sewn onto his skin. The water bearer arrives with the morning ration, a clay jar that holds barely enough for each man to wet his throat and wash the sleep from his eyes. You cup the precious liquid in your hands, feeling its coolness against your cracked palms. The water tastes of sand and salt, but it's clean enough to drink without immediately falling ill. You've learned to make it last, to take small sips and let each one sit in your mouth before swallowing. Someone has died during the night. You can tell because there's an empty sleeping mat where yesterday there was a man, a young farmer from the Delta, who'd been coughing blood for weeks. The body has already been removed, carried out in the darkness, before the rest of you woke. It's better this way, the overseers have learned. Seeing the dead makes the living more difficult to manage, reminds them too clearly of their own fate. The morning routine is mechanical now, burned into your muscles and bones through repetition. You check your tools, the ropes that will tear your hands apart, the wooden levers that will strain your back, the bronze implements that weigh almost as much as you can lift. Everything is crude, designed for functionality rather than the comfort of those who use them. The ropes are made from reeds and hemp, rough enough to draw blood even through calloused skin. The levers are simple wooden beams, heavy and unwieldy, that amplify human strength just enough to move blocks that would otherwise be impossible to budge. Your clothing is little more than a loincloth and a rough tunic that barely covers your chest. The fabric is coarse, woven from the cheapest materials available, and it chafes against your skin wherever it touches. In winter, it provides little protection against the cold desert nights. In summer, it traps heat and sweat against your body, but it's all you have, and you've learned to be grateful for even these small protections. The walk to the construction site begins before the sun shows its face above the eastern horizon. Workers file out of the quarters in long, silent lines, their footsteps raising small clouds of dust that catch the light from the overseer's torches. The path is worn smooth by thousands of feet, a depression in the desert floor that marks the daily migration from misery to labor. The stars are still visible overhead, brilliant points of light in the clear desert sky. Sometimes you find yourself looking up at them, remembering nights in your old life when you could lie outside your home and watch the constellations wheel overhead without fear, without pain, without the crushing weight of hopelessness pressing down on your chest. Those memories feel like dreams now, or like stories someone once told you about a different person's life. The desert air is cool at this hour, carrying scents of sand and stone and the distant Nile. For these few minutes before the sun rises, the temperature is almost pleasant, neither the bone-chilling cold of night nor the crushing heat of day. You've learned to savor this brief respite, to store up the memory of cool air against your skin for the hours of suffering that lie ahead. As you walk, you notice the rhythm of the group. Workers instinctively space themselves to avoid crowding, but close enough to provide mutual support if someone stumbles. There's a cadence to the movement, shared understanding of how to conserve energy while still maintaining the pace the overseers demand. Those who walk too fast will collapse before midday. Those who lag behind will feel the sting of the whip. The overseers ride alongside the workers on donkeys, their elevated position a constant reminder of the hierarchy that governs this place. They carry whips made from braided leather, clubs carved from hard wood, and the absolute authority to make life even more miserable for anyone who displeases them. Their faces show the callous indifference of men who have stopped seeing workers as human beings. Ahead of you, the pyramid looms against the starlit sky like a man-made mountain. Even in the darkness, You can see its massive outline, the geometric precision of its edges, the ramps that snake up its sides like the paths of some impossible climb. It grows larger every day, stone by stone, built with your blood and sweat and the accumulated suffering of thousands of men, just like you. The construction site is already active when you arrive. Torches burn at regular intervals, casting flickering light on the organized chaos of pyramid building. Other work crews are already hauling blocks up the ramps, their efforts coordinated by work songs that echo across the desert. The sound of stone grinding against stone fills the air, mixed with the shouts of overseers and the occasional cry of pain when someone is injured. Your assignment is waiting for you at the base of the pyramid, written on a piece of pottery, in hieroglyphs you can't read, but you don't need to read it to understand what's expected. You can see the ropes, the blocks, the ramp that stretches up into the darkness above. Another day of hauling limestone blocks that weigh more than several men combined. Another day of feeling your body slowly break down under demands that no human being should be asked to meet. And as you take your position with the rope crew, wrapping the rough hemp around hands that are already raw from yesterday's work, you feel the weight of the coming day settle on your shoulders like a physical burden. The sun hasn't yet shown its face, but you can feel it coming, waiting just below the horizon to begin its daily torture of heat and light and crushing, inescapable misery. Hauling stone, breaking bodies, the first rays of sunlight pierce the horizon, just as you wrap the hemp rope around your bleeding hands for what feels like the 1,000th time. The rope is thick as a man's thumb, woven from reeds that grow along the Nile, but rough enough to tear through skin like a dull blade. You've learned to position the rope across the thickest calluses on your palms, to distribute the weight and friction across areas of your hands that have already been destroyed and rebuilt so many times they barely feel like part of your body anymore. The limestone block assigned to your crew weighs somewhere between 2 and 3 tons, a mass of stone so heavy that it defies comprehension until you feel it fighting against your efforts to move it. The block is roughly rectangular, cut from the quarries across the Nile with bronze tools and wooden wedges, then ferried across the river on barges that groan under the weight. Each stone represents weeks of labor from quarry workers whose lives are, if possible, even more brutal than your own. Your crew consists of 12 men, though the number changes frequently as workers are injured, die, or simply disappear into the administrative machinery of the pyramid complex. Today, you recognize most faces, weathered, gaunt men whose bodies have been sculpted by suffering into lean collections of muscle, bone, and scar tissue. The newest member of your crew is a young man, barely out of boyhood, whose soft hands and round face mark him as a recent arrival. He won't look like that for long. The overseer assigns your crew to haul blocks up the main ramp, a massive earthen and stone construction that spirals around the pyramid's growing height. The ramp is perhaps 20 feet wide, built from limestone, chips, sand, and clay, packed down by the passage of countless workers and the weight of countless stones. It rises at a gentle angle that seems manageable from a distance, but becomes a mountain of suffering when you're hauling multi-ton blocks up its length. The work begins with positioning. 12 men arrange themselves around the block like spokes on a wheel, each finding the optimal angle to pull without interfering with his neighbors. The ropes are threaded through bronze rings attached to the stone, distributing the load as evenly as possible across the crew. But even with this mechanical advantage, each man will be pulling against hundreds of pounds of resistance for hours at a time. You take your position at the front of the crew, your rope cutting deep grooves into palms that have been scarred by this same process countless times before. The hemp feels familiar in your hands, like a tool you've been cursed to use for eternity. Behind you, you can hear the other workers adjusting their grips, testing the tension, preparing their bodies for the ordeal ahead. The overseer's whip cracks in the air above your heads, and the work begins. "Heave!" comes the command, and 12 men lean forward against their ropes with everything they have. The stone resists at first, held in place by its own massive weight and the friction between limestone and packed earth. For a moment that stretches like eternity, nothing happens. Your muscles strain, your feet dig into the ramp's surface, your back bends under the impossible load. Then, slowly, reluctantly, the block begins to move, inch by grinding inch. It slides forward along the ramp's surface. The sound it makes is like the earth itself groaning in protest, a deep, rumbling scrape that seems to come from the bowels of the world. Each step forward requires everything you have, every fiber of muscle, every remaining fragment of will. The work song begins as the block finds its rhythm. It's a simple chant, more rhythm than melody, designed to coordinate the efforts of the crew and provide some distraction from the agony of the work. Heave and pull, heave and pull, for the God King's eternal tomb. The words become meaningless after the first hour, just sounds to help synchronize the pulling motion that will consume your entire day. Your hands begin to bleed within the first few minutes. The rope cuts through whatever protection your calluses provide, finding new places to tear and burn. Blood makes the rope slippery, which makes it harder to grip, which means you have to squeeze even tighter, which causes more bleeding. It's a cycle that ends only when your hands become so damaged that you physically cannot continue, or when the day's work is finally finished. The sun climbs higher, and with it comes the heat that transforms the ramp into a furnace. The limestone blocks radiate stored heat like ovens, burning your skin wherever you accidentally brush against them. The packed earth of the ramp becomes scorching hot, baking through the thin soles of your sandals and raising blisters on the bottoms of your feet. Sweat begins to pour from your body, precious fluid that you can't afford to lose but can't stop from flowing. Behind you, the young worker is already struggling. His soft hands are bleeding more freely than the rest of the crew's, and his breathing has taken on the ragged quality of someone pushed beyond his limits. You want to help him, to offer some advice or encouragement, but you've learned that drawing attention to a struggling worker often makes things worse for everyone. The overseers see weakness as contagious and respond with increased brutality. The ramp stretches ahead of you like a path to nowhere, rising steadily toward the pyramid's growing height. Each step forward is a victory measured in inches, each foot of progress. Small triumph over the massive inertia of the stone block, but the distance to your destination seems to grow longer rather than shorter as the morning progresses, as if the pyramid itself is retreating from your efforts. Other crews work alongside you on the ramp, each hauling their own massive burden toward the construction site above. The sound of their efforts creates a symphony of suffering, the scrape of stone on packed earth, the rhythmic chanting of work songs, the crack of overseers' whips, and underneath it all, the constant background noise of human pain. Men grunt with effort, cry out when ropes cut too deep, gasp for air in the increasingly oppressive heat. Water becomes an obsession as the sun climbs higher. Your tongue feels thick and swollen in your mouth, your throat raw from breathing the dusty air. The water bearers make occasional rounds, offering clay cups of lukewarm, brackish water to workers who are close to collapse. But the rations are carefully controlled, designed to keep workers functional rather than comfortable. Too much water, and men become sluggish. Too little, and they die. The administrators have calculated the precise amount needed to extract maximum labor while preserving their investment in human resources. The accidents begin as they always do, with small mistakes amplified by fatigue and heat. A worker's foot slips on the ramp's uneven surface. A rope breaks under the strain, sending men stumbling backward into each other. Someone loses his grip and falls beneath the moving stone block. The injuries are immediate and often devastating. Crushed limbs, broken bones, flesh torn away by hemp rope or rough stone. You watch a man from another crew get his leg trapped beneath a shifting block. The stone weighs more than 20 men could lift, and there's no quick way to free him. His screams echo across the construction site as the overseers debate whether it's worth the effort to organize a rescue. Time is precious here, and workers are replaceable. Eventually they decide to try, but by then the damage is done. The man's leg is crushed beyond repair, and you know he'll be dead within days, either from infection or from simple inability to work. The young worker in your crew is falling behind, his movements becoming increasingly erratic as exhaustion and pain overwhelm his system. His hands are bleeding so freely that he's leaving red stains on the rope, and his breathing has taken on the shallow, rapid quality of someone on the edge of collapse. The overseer notices and moves closer, his whip ready. "Pull harder, boy." The command is accompanied by a sharp crack of leather across the young man's bare back. The blow leaves a red welt that immediately begins to swell. But more importantly, it serves as a warning to the rest of the crew. Anyone who can't keep up faces similar treatment, and repeated failures lead to more severe punishments. The stone block seems to grow heavier as the day progresses, though you know it's your strength that's diminishing rather than the block's weight increasing. Your muscles burn with the deep, sustained ache of overuse. Your back feels like it's being slowly torn apart, vertebra by vertebra. Your legs shake with the effort of maintaining position and leverage on the increasingly treacherous ramp surface. Noon approaches, and with it comes the heat that makes the morning's work seem pleasant by comparison. The sun beats down on the construction site like a physical force, turning the air itself into something thick and oppressive that's hard to breathe. The limestone blocks become too hot to touch with bare skin, and the ramp's surface radiates heat in shimmering waves that make the distance ahead appear to dance and waver like a mirage. And still the work continues, because stopping means punishment, and punishment in this place often means death. So you lean into your rope, feeling it cut deeper into hands that have long since gone numb, and take another step forward up the endless ramp, hauling your burden of stone toward a pyramid that grows larger and more magnificent with each passing day, built on a foundation of human suffering that will never be recorded in any official history. The quarry's embrace. But perhaps your fate could have been worse. Perhaps you could have been assigned to the quarries across the Nile, where the limestone blocks begin their journey to the pyramid, in chambers carved deep beneath the earth's surface. The quarry workers live in a different kind of hell, one measured not by the burning heat of the desert sun, but by the crushing weight of stone above their heads and the slow death that comes from breathing rock dust for months on end. The limestone quarries stretch across the eastern bank of the Nile like a collection of wounds in the earth's flesh. From the surface, they appear as simple holes in the ground, openings barely wide enough for a man to squeeze through. But beneath that deceptive surface lies a labyrinth of tunnels and chambers that follow the limestone veins deep into the bedrock. It's a world of perpetual twilight, where the sun never shines and the air tastes of crushed stone and human desperation. Imagine descending into one of these quarries for the first time. The entrance is a narrow shaft cut straight down through sand and softer stone until it reaches the limestone layer that provides the pyramid's building material. You climb down on crude wooden ladders, their rung slippery with moisture and worn smooth by the passage of countless workers. The temperature drops as you descend, but this coolness comes at a price. The air becomes thick and oppressive, laden with dust that settles in your lungs like sediment in a still pond. The sound changes as you go deeper, the familiar noise of the construction site above, the shouts of overseers, the scrape of stone on stone, the crack of whips, fades away until it becomes a distant memory. Instead, you're surrounded by the sounds of the underground world, the steady tap, tap, tap of bronze chisels against limestone, the scrape of wooden levers prying blocks free from the living rock, and the labored breathing of men working in spaces barely large enough to contain their bodies. The tunnels themselves are marvels of desperate engineering, carved with nothing but bronze tools and human determination. They follow the limestone veins wherever they lead, creating a maze of passages that branch and intersect like the burrows of some enormous animal. Some tunnels are wide enough for two men to work side by side. Others are so narrow that workers must crawl on their bellies, chipping away at the stone face with tools they can barely maneuver in the confined space. The workers here move like shadows in the dim light of oil lamps and torches. Their bodies have been shaped by their environment, lean and wiry from squeezing through narrow passages, their backs permanently bent from working in low spaces, their hands scarred and calloused from handling rough stone and crude tools. Their skin has taken on a grayish pallor from the constant exposure to limestone dust, and their eyes have developed the 1,000-yard stare of men who have spent too long in darkness. Each limestone block begins as part of the living rock, identified by quarry masters who can read the stone. Like farmers read soil, they look for the natural fault lines and weaknesses that will allow a block to be separated cleanly from its surroundings. The process of extraction is both art and brutality, requiring precision in the placement of chisels and wedges, but also the raw strength to drive bronze tools through solid stone. The work begins with scoring, using sharp chisels to cut deep lines along the intended boundaries of the block. This is delicate work that requires skill and experience, because a poorly placed cut can ruin an entire section of stone. The workers who do this scoring are among the most valued in the quarry, but their expertise comes at a price. Their hands are permanently damaged from gripping vibrating chisels, their wrists and elbows destroyed by the constant, jarring impact of bronze against limestone. Once the block is scored, wooden wedges are driven into the cuts and soaked with water. As the wood swells, it creates pressure that slowly splits the stone along the predetermined lines. This process can take hours or even days, depending on the size of the block and the hardness of the stone. Workers must constantly tend the wedges, adding water, adjusting pressure, listening for the subtle sounds that indicate when the stone is ready to break free. The moment of separation is both triumph and terror. When a multi-ton block finally breaks free from the quarry wall, it can crush anyone unfortunate enough to be in its path. Workers have developed an intricate system of ropes and levers to control the fall, but accidents are common. You've seen men flattened like insects beneath blocks they spent weeks extracting, their lives snuffed out in an instant by the very stone they helped create. But perhaps even worse than the sudden death of a cave-in is the slow death that comes from breathing limestone dust day after day, month after month. The dust is so fine it's almost invisible, but it settles in workers' lungs like snow that never melts. At first, it causes nothing more than a persistent cough and shortness of breath. But over time, the accumulated dust hardens in the lungs, making each breath more difficult than the last. You can always identify the veteran quarry workers by their breathing, a wet, rattling sound that speaks of lungs slowly turning to stone. They cough constantly, bringing up bloody phlegm mixed with limestone dust. Their lips and fingernails take on a bluish tinge from lack of oxygen. Eventually, they reach a point where they can no longer work, gasping for air even while sitting. Still, death comes slowly, suffocation measured in weeks rather than minutes. The quarry tunnels are poorly ventilated, relying on natural air currents and the movement of workers to circulate fresh air. In the deeper chambers, the air becomes so thick with dust that torches dim and workers feel lightheaded from lack of oxygen. Some tunnels have to be abandoned temporarily while the air clears, but the pressure to meet quotas means workers are often sent back before conditions are truly safe. Cave-ins are a constant threat in the quarries. The limestone layers are shot through with natural faults and weaknesses, and the process of extraction can destabilize large sections of the underground structure. Workers learn to read the subtle signs, the small sounds that indicate shifting stone, the tiny fragments that fall from tunnel ceilings, the way dust patterns change when pressure builds in the rock above. When a cave-in occurs, it's usually sudden and devastating. One moment, a worker is chipping away at a limestone face, and the next moment, tons of rock come crashing down, sealing off tunnels and crushing anyone unlucky enough to be caught beneath. The rescue efforts are often futile. By the time crews can dig through the rubble, the trapped workers have either been crushed to death or suffocated in the dust-filled darkness. The psychological toll of working underground is perhaps as severe as the physical dangers. Men who spend their days in narrow, dark tunnels develop a peculiar form of madness, a claustrophobic panic that can strike without warning. You've seen strong workers suddenly drop their tools and run screaming toward the surface, clawing at tunnel walls like trapped animals. Most never return to the quarries, but some do, driven back by the same desperation that brought them here in the first place. Water is even more precious in the quarries than on the surface. The underground chambers are dry, and every drop must be carried down from above. Workers ration their water carefully, using it to wet the wooden wedges, to settle the worst of the dust, and finally, if any remains, to wet their parched throats. Dehydration is common, made worse by the physical exertion of working in confined spaces and the constant inhalation of dust. The hierarchy in the quarries is different from that on the pyramid site above. Here, experience and skill matter more than physical strength. The workers who can read stone, who know where to place cuts and wedges, who can extract blocks cleanly without damaging the surrounding rock, these men hold positions of relative privilege. But even they are expendable, their knowledge valued only as long as their bodies can perform the required tasks. Food in the quarries is the same meager ration provided to all pyramid workers: coarse bread, onions, garlic, and occasionally dried fish. But eating underground presents its own challenges. Everything becomes coated with limestone dust, giving food a gritty texture that grinds between your teeth and settles in your stomach like sand. Many workers develop digestive problems, their systems unable to process the constant intake of stone particles. The oil lamps that provide light in the tunnels create their own hazards. The flame consumes precious oxygen, and the smoke adds to the already oppressive atmosphere. Lamps go out regularly, leaving workers in complete darkness until they can be relit. Some workers become lost in the maze of tunnels, wandering in the blackness until exhaustion and thirst claim them. And yet, the work continues, because the pyramid above demands its steady supply of limestone blocks. Each day, quarry workers descend into their underground hell, chipping away at the living rock with tools that seem inadequate for the task. They breathe dust that slowly kills them, risk death from falling stone, and endure the psychological torture of working in darkness, all to provide the raw materials for a dead king's monument to immortality. Masters of misery, above the workers, controlling every aspect of their miserable existence, stands a hierarchy of men who have learned to profit from human suffering. These are the overseers, the taskmasters, the administrators who form the machinery of oppression that keeps the pyramid construction running with ruthless efficiency. They are the masters of misery, and understanding their methods reveals the true, systematic nature of the cruelty that defines life in this place. At the bottom of this hierarchy of oppression are the gang leaders, workers who have been elevated slightly above their fellows through a combination of experience, brutality, and willingness to betray their own kind. These men still perform physical labor, but they also carry the authority to distribute work assignments, rations, and punishments within their groups. They've learned that survival sometimes requires becoming complicit in the system that oppresses you, and they've made that terrible choice with the desperate calculation of men who have nothing left to lose. You recognize them easily. They're the workers who eat slightly better, whose clothes are marginally cleaner, who carry themselves with the careful swagger of men who know they're one mistake away from falling back into the general population of the damned. They've traded whatever humanity they once possessed for small privileges and the illusion of control over their fate. But their position is precarious, dependent entirely on their ability to extract maximum labor from workers who were once their equals. Above the gang leaders are the section overseers, Egyptians who have never performed manual labor themselves, but who understand the mathematics of human exploitation with scientific precision. These men carry whips made from braided leather, clubs carved from hard wood, and the absolute authority to make life unbearable for anyone who displeases them. They move through the construction site like predators, their eyes constantly scanning for signs of weakness, inefficiency, or defiance. The section overseers have elevated cruelty to an art form. They understand that fear is more effective than actual violence, that the threat of punishment often motivates workers more than punishment itself. They've learned to read the subtle signs of exhaustion, rebellion, or despair in a worker's posture, and they respond with calibrated brutality designed to maintain control without completely destroying their human resources. Watch one of these overseers as he makes his rounds. He stops beside a rope crew hauling limestone blocks, his presence immediately causing the workers to strain harder against their load. He doesn't speak at first, just observes, noting which men are pulling with full effort and which are trying to conserve their strength. His whip hangs coiled at his side like a sleeping serpent, and every worker knows that it can strike without warning. You, he says, pointing at a worker whose rope has gone slightly slack. Step forward. The command is delivered in a conversational tone that somehow makes it more terrifying than if he had shouted. The worker approaches with the careful movements of a man trying not to appear threatening while knowing that he's already been marked for punishment. The overseer circles him slowly, like a buyer examining livestock, noting the worker's condition with professional interest. The punishment, when it comes, is precisely calculated. 3 strikes with the whip, enough to cause significant pain and leave marks that will remind the worker and his crew of their vulnerability, but not enough to render him unable to work. The overseer has learned through experience exactly how much damage a human body can absorb while remaining functional. It's a skill that requires both cruelty and intelligence, and he takes pride in his expertise. Above the section, overseers are the work coordinators, men who never dirty their hands with direct violence, but who design the systems that make violence inevitable. They create the quotas that workers must meet, the schedules that determine when men work and when they rest, the regulations that govern every aspect of life in the workers' village. They understand that the most effective oppression is the kind that appears systematic rather than personal. that feels like natural law rather than human choice. These coordinators work from offices near the pyramid site, surrounded by pottery, tablets covered with hieroglyphic records of productivity, injury rates, and resource allocation. They track workers like inventory, noting which groups are most efficient, which individuals are likely to cause problems, which techniques produce the best results with the least cost in human resources. To them, workers are numbers in an equation, variables to be manipulated to achieve optimal outcomes. The coordinators have discovered that variety in punishment is more effective than consistency. Sometimes they respond to infractions with immediate physical violence. Other times they reduce food rations, restrict water access, or assign workers to more dangerous tasks. The unpredictability keeps workers off balance, never quite sure what will trigger punishment or what form that punishment might take. This uncertainty is itself a form of torture, creating a constant state of anxiety that wears down resistance more effectively than any whip. At the apex of this hierarchy stands the chief administrator, a man whose name carries weight throughout the pyramid complex, but who remains largely invisible to the workers themselves. He appears occasionally at the construction site, usually accompanied by scribes and guards, observing the work with the detached interest of someone reviewing a complex but familiar process. His presence causes ripples of increased activity throughout the site as every level of the hierarchy tries to demonstrate their efficiency and control. The chief administrator has achieved his position through a combination of intelligence, political skill, and utter indifference to human suffering. He sees the pyramid construction as a logistical challenge, a problem of moving massive amounts of stone from quarries to construction site using available resources, which happen to include large numbers of expendable human beings. His innovations in work organization and population management are studied and copied by administrators throughout the kingdom. The hierarchy maintains its power through a carefully designed system of rewards and punishments that creates competition between workers rather than solidarity. Gang leaders who exceed their quotas receive better rations and safer work assignments. Workers who demonstrate particular skills or reliability may be promoted to positions of slight privilege, but these rewards are always temporary, always dependent on continued performance, and always distributed in ways that prevent workers from organizing against their oppressors. The overseers have learned to exploit every human weakness and need. They understand that workers who have formed friendships will work harder to protect each other, so they deliberately separate close associates and assign them to different crews. They know that workers who maintain hope of returning home are less likely to rebel, so they occasionally allow letters to be sent to families, letters that are carefully screened and often never delivered, but which maintain the illusion of connection to the outside world. Sexual violence is another tool in the overseer's arsenal of control. Women in the workers' village exist at the complete mercy of men who have absolute power over them. Overseers take women as they please, often in front of their husbands or fathers, using sexual assault as a demonstration of total dominance. The psychological damage this causes extends far beyond the immediate victims, creating an atmosphere of helplessness and rage that the overseers then channel into increased productivity. The administrative system has also created elaborate bureaucracies around punishment that make cruelty seem rational and systematic. Infractions are categorized and recorded, with specific penalties assigned to different types of offenses. Workers who are consistently late receive reduced rations. Those who show signs of organizing resistance are assigned to the most dangerous work details. Repeated offenders simply disappear, their names struck from the rolls as if they had never existed. Perhaps most insidiously, the hierarchy has created a culture where workers police themselves. The constant threat of collective punishment means that groups will often discipline their own members rather than risk having the entire crew penalized for one person's infractions. Workers learn to report on each other, to suppress signs of dissent within their own ranks, to become complicit in their own oppression as a survival strategy. The overseers maintain detailed records of worker productivity, tracking not just the number of blocks moved, but the efficiency with which work is completed, the frequency of accidents, and the rates of illness and death in different work groups. This data allows them to identify the most effective techniques for extracting labor and to spot problems before they become serious threats to the construction schedule. The psychological manipulation extends to the smallest details of daily life. Food is distributed in ways that create artificial scarcity, with some workers receiving slightly larger portions to generate envy and competition. Work assignments are rotated unpredictably, preventing workers from developing expertise that might give them leverage. Even sleep schedules are manipulated, with some crews forced to work night shifts that disrupt their natural rhythms and make them more compliant. And through it all, the masters of misery maintain the fiction that they are simply administrators carrying out necessary work. They speak of quotas and efficiency, of resource allocation and project management, using bureaucratic language to disguise the reality that they are systematically destroying human lives for the greater glory of a dead king's monument. They have created a machine that consumes people and produces limestone blocks, and they operate it with the casual efficiency of men who have long since stopped seeing their victims as fellow human beings. Midday, suffering. The sun reaches its zenith above the construction site like a malevolent god surveying its domain of suffering. By now, you've been hauling limestone blocks for 6 hours, and your body has entered that strange state between exhaustion and collapse where movement becomes purely mechanical, driven by muscle memory and the primal fear of what happens to workers who stop. The temperature has climbed steadily since dawn, transforming the pyramid site into a furnace that seems designed specifically to torture human flesh. The heat at midday in the Egyptian desert is not merely hot, it's a living thing that presses down on you with physical weight, making each breath feel like swallowing fire. The air shimmers in waves that make distant objects dance and waver like mirages, and the limestone blocks have become so hot that touching them with bare skin causes immediate burns. The ramp beneath your feet radiates heat through the thin soles of your sandals, creating the sensation that you're walking across glowing coals. Your rope crew has been reduced to 8 men from the original 12. 2 workers collapsed from heat exhaustion an hour ago and were dragged away to whatever fate awaits those who can no longer contribute to the pyramid's construction. Another man simply walked away from his rope during the morning's work, stumbling toward the desert with the vacant expression of someone whose mind has finally broken under the accumulated stress and suffering. The overseer let him go. The desert will kill him more efficiently than any punishment they could devise. The young worker who joined your crew this morning is still somehow functioning, though his condition has deteriorated dramatically. His face is flushed red despite his dark skin, and sweat pours from his body in streams that have left white salt stains on his tunic. His hands are no longer bleeding. They've moved beyond that stage to something worse, where the rope has worn away so much flesh that you can see the white of bone in places, but he continues to pull, driven by the same desperate instinct for survival that keeps you all moving. Water has become an obsession that dominates every thought. Your tongue feels thick and swollen in your mouth, your throat raw from breathing the superheated air. The water bearers make their rounds every 2 hours, offering small clay cups of brackish water that's barely enough to wet your lips. You've learned to hold each precious sip in your mouth as long as possible, letting it trickle slowly down your throat to maximize the sensation of relief. But the respite is temporary. Within minutes of drinking, your body is crying out for more. The limestone block you've been hauling has become a thing of torment beyond its crushing weight. The stone has absorbed heat from the sun until it's too hot to touch, radiating warmth like a massive oven. The bronze rings that hold your ropes have become burning hot, transferring heat through the hemp directly to your already damaged hands. Every contact with the block leaves new burns, adding thermal injury to the rope cuts and stone abrasions that already cover your palms and fingers. Around you, other work crews are experiencing their own forms of heat-induced agony. Men stumble and fall, overcome by temperatures that push human endurance beyond its limits. Some workers have stopped sweating entirely, a sign that their bodies can no longer regulate temperature, a condition that usually precedes collapse and death. Others have developed the glassy-eyed stare of severe dehydration, their movements becoming increasingly uncoordinated as their brains struggle to function without adequate fluid. The overseers have adapted their methods to account for the midday heat. They carry large clay jars of water, not for the workers, but for themselves, drinking freely while watching workers collapse from thirst. Their whips see less use during the hottest part of the day, not from any sense of mercy, but because workers who are already at the edge of heat stroke cannot be pushed much harder without losing them entirely. Instead, the overseers rely on threats and the workers' own desperation to maintain productivity. The construction site has taken on an almost surreal quality in the heat. The massive pyramid wavers in the shimmering air, sometimes appearing closer than it actually is, sometimes seeming to retreat into the distance. The sounds of work, the scraping of stone, the chanting of work songs, the shouts of overseers become distorted by the heat, creating echoes and phantom noises that add to the disorienting effect of working in such extreme conditions. You notice how the heat amplifies every other form of suffering. The rope burns on your hands feel like brands held against your flesh, The ache in your back becomes a searing pain that radiates through your entire body. Even breathing hurts as the superheated air scorches your throat and lungs with each inhalation. The heat doesn't just add to your misery, it multiplies it, making every existing injury and discomfort exponentially worse. The rhythm of work changes during the midday hours. The steady pace of the morning gives way to something more desperate and erratic. Workers push themselves in short bursts of activity, followed by moments of near collapse, their bodies unable to sustain consistent effort in the extreme heat. The work songs become less coordinated, breaking down into individual gasps and grunts as men struggle simply to breathe while maintaining their grip on burning ropes. Some workers have developed their own desperate strategies for coping with the heat. Men tear strips from their already minimal clothing to wrap around their heads, creating makeshift protection from the sun's direct rays. Others try to position themselves to take advantage of the small shadows cast by the limestone blocks. Though these shadows shift constantly as the work progresses, a few workers have learned to breathe through their nose instead of their mouth, a technique that provides minimal relief but feels significant when you're desperate for any improvement in your condition. The food that was distributed at dawn has become inedible in the heat. The bread has hardened into something resembling stone, and the onions have begun to rot in the extreme temperature. Even if you had the energy to eat, the thought of swallowing anything solid seems impossible when your throat feels like sandpaper and your stomach churns from heat sickness. Yet your body continues to demand fuel, creating a cruel paradox where you need nutrition to continue working, but cannot consume the food that might provide it. The accidents multiply during the midday hours as heat exhaustion impairs judgment and coordination. Workers lose their grip on ropes, stumble over their own feet, or simply collapse without warning. A man from another crew falls beneath his limestone block, his heat-addled reflexes too slow to get out of the way. His screams are brief but piercing, cutting through the general noise of the construction site before being abruptly silenced. The work continues around his crushed body because stopping the schedule for individual casualties is simply not acceptable. To the administrators who track productivity from their shaded offices, your vision begins to blur as dehydration affects your brain's ability to process visual information. The edges of your sight become dark and fuzzy, and you start seeing movement in your peripheral vision that isn't really there. This is a dangerous sign, one that often precedes total collapse, but you have no choice except to continue working. Stopping means punishment, and punishment in your weakened condition would almost certainly mean death. The young worker beside you makes a sound that's part sob, part gasp, part prayer to gods who seem to have abandoned this place entirely. His legs are shaking uncontrollably now, and his grip on the rope has become so weak that he's barely contributing to the crew's efforts. You want to help him, to offer some word of encouragement, or share some of your own rapidly depleting strength. But the heat has reduced all human interaction to the most basic level of survival. The brief rest periods that punctuate the work day become exercises in their own form of torture. Sitting or lying on the burning ground provides no relief from the heat, and the few patches of shade are jealously guarded by the overseers. Workers huddle in whatever shelter they can find, panting like dogs, their bodies desperate to cool down, but unable to do so in the oppressive environment. These rest periods feel almost worse than working because they allow you to fully experience the extent of your suffering without the distraction of physical labor. The sun seems to move with agonizing slowness across the sky, each minute stretching into eternity as you wait for the slight relief that comes with the afternoon's gradual cooling. But that relief is still hours away, and you're not certain you can survive that long. Your body has begun to shut down non-essential functions to conserve what little energy and fluid remain. Your hands have gone numb, your vision continues to deteriorate, and your thoughts have become increasingly disconnected from reality, and still the work continues, because the pyramid demands its daily sacrifice of human suffering, and the heat has simply become another tool in the systematic destruction of the workers who build monuments to immortality while knowing they will never live to see their completion, the end of suffering. Our journey through the terrible life of pyramid builders draws to a close. Let us drift through the final chapters of this ancient tragedy, the inevitable decline of human bodies pushed beyond all limits, the crushing realization of lives consumed by monuments to vanity, and the quiet acceptance that comes when resistance finally dies. Sickness and death, the constant companions. Disease moves through the workers' village like an invisible predator, claiming victims with ruthless efficiency. The limestone dust that fills every breath slowly transforms lungs into stone, creating a wet, rattling cough that marks the beginning of the end. You watch strong men waste away as their lungs fail, their lips turning blue from lack of oxygen, their bodies struggling to extract life from air that no longer nourishes them. Dysentery spreads through the cramped quarters in waves, turning the latrines into places of agony where workers soil themselves while laboring because they cannot afford to stop. The contaminated water supply ensures that illness is not a question of if, but when. Infected wounds become festering sores that spread poisonous lines up arms and legs, marking the slow advance of death through bodies that have no reserves left to fight infection. The village maintains massive burial pits beyond its walls, great trenches where bodies are stacked like cordwood and covered with sand. No ceremonies mark these deaths. No records preserve the names of the deceased. Workers disappear from the daily count, their sleeping mats quickly filled by new arrivals who will follow the same inevitable path from conscription to death. The turnover is so constant that veterans learn not to form attachments, knowing that friendship only multiplies suffering when loss becomes inevitable. The long seasons. Lives consumed. The pyramid construction stretches across decades, consuming entire lifetimes in its insatiable hunger for human labors. Workers who arrive as young men watch their bodies age rapidly under the crushing demands of moving limestone blocks. Their hair turns gray from stress and poor nutrition. Their backs bend permanently from years of hauling impossible weights. Their hands become gnarled claws shaped by rope and stone. Seasonal patterns govern the work. During the Nile's flood season, when agricultural work is impossible. Fresh workers arrive by the thousands, swelling the population of the village with new victims. The pyramid grows steadily larger, its limestone courses rising toward the sky with mathematical precision, each block representing days of human agony that will never be acknowledged or remembered. Some workers spend their entire adult lives in service to the pyramid, watching it grow from foundation to completion while their own lives shrink to the simple cycle of work, eat, sleep, repeat. They become institutional memories, teaching new arrivals the survival techniques that might keep them alive a few months longer. But even these veterans eventually reach the point where their bodies can no longer meet the demands placed upon them, and they join the anonymous thousands in the burial pits. Rebellion and resignation, the breaking of spirit. Occasionally, desperation overcomes fear, and workers attempt to organize resistance against their oppressors. These rebellions are brief and always end in spectacular brutality, designed to discourage future attempts. Leaders are crucified or impaled, their bodies left as warnings to anyone who might harbor thoughts of defiance. Collective punishments follow: reduced rations, increased work quotas, the selection of random workers for execution as an example to the rest. But most workers never reach the point of active rebellion. The system is too effective at breaking human spirit, grinding down resistance through the accumulated weight of daily suffering. Hope dies slowly, worn away like stone under constant pressure. Workers learn to accept their fate with the resignation of animals led to slaughter, their minds retreating to some protected space where the worst of reality cannot penetrate. Small acts of defiance persist. Workers sharing food despite prohibition, helping injured comrades despite risk of punishment, maintaining fragments of human dignity in conditions designed to destroy it completely. These tiny rebellions against dehumanization become acts of courage in a world where simply surviving another day requires heroic effort. Legacy of suffering, the price of immortality. When the pyramid finally reaches completion, its perfect geometric form rising from the desert, like a man-made mountain, the surviving workers find that their nightmare is far from over. Some are reassigned to other construction projects, their expertise in moving massive stones making them valuable resources. Others are simply abandoned, left to make their way in a world that has no place for men whose bodies have been destroyed by years of impossible labor. The pyramid stands as a monument to human achievement, its precise engineering and massive scale inspiring awe in visitors for millennia to come. But hidden within its perfect limestone courses are the compressed remains of human suffering, the blood that mortared its stones, the tears that wet its foundations, the countless lives that were consumed in its creation. History will remember the architects and the pharaoh, the engineers and the mathematical precision of the pyramid's construction, but the workers who built it with their flesh and bones will remain anonymous, their suffering unrecorded except in the stones themselves. They become part of the monument they created, their lives literally built into its structure, their stories silenced by the very grandeur of their achievement. The final rest. And now, as this dark journey comes to its end, let yourself drift away from these scenes of ancient suffering. The pyramid builders have told their story through your experience, their pain acknowledged, even if history chose to forget them. Their struggle reminds us that behind every monument to human greatness lie the forgotten stories of ordinary people who paid extraordinary prices for others' immortality. Let the weight of their sacrifice settle gently into memory as you sink deeper into rest, carrying with you the knowledge that human dignity persists even in the darkest circumstances. That courage can be found in simple survival, and that remembering the forgotten is perhaps the greatest honor we can offer those who suffered so that wonders might endure. The pyramid stands eternal against the desert sky, its stones silent now about the cost of their placement, its chambers holding the secrets of kings, while the bones of its builders rest in unmarked graves beneath the sand. But their story lives on in the telling, in the acknowledgement of suffering that history preferred to ignore, in the recognition that true monuments are built not just from stone, but from the accumulated hopes and dreams and pain of countless human hearts. Sleep now, knowing that their struggle was not entirely in vain, if it teaches us to value the human cost of greatness, to remember that behind every wonder of the ancient world stand armies of the forgotten whose sacrifice made miracles possible. Let their story carry you gently into darkness, their voices finally heard across the centuries, their suffering transformed at last into wisdom and rest.